The wind no longer sang on Varela. Once it had rustled through golden leaves and whispered across glassy lakes. Now it howled, dry and restless, across a cracked, brittle land. Above, the sky was pale gray, as if the color had been drained. From it, and in the distance, storm clouds brewed, heavy with chemicals rather than rain. The Thalari watched from their towers, high above the decaying forests. Tall, graceful beings with silver-blue skin and eyes like polished stone, they had once built their cities in harmony with the world. Their architecture flowed with the landscape, domes wrapped in living trees, bridges spun from bioluminescent thread, towers that swayed gently with the wind. Now, even the trees were failing. The great light vines had gone dim. At the heart of the capital city, in a chamber made of living crystal, the Council of Thalara stood in silence. They did not argue, for there was nothing left to debate. The scans were clear. Their atmosphere was collapsing. The soil could no longer yield food. The oceans had retreated farther in the last 10 cycles than they had in the past 100. High Speaker Inari, her voice soft but steady, looked across the circle of elders. "The last energy seed has been spent," she said. "We cannot grow new forests. The air wells cannot sustain another season. We must decide what final measure remains to us." Most of the council remained quiet. Only one raised a hand, a scientist named Volin, known more for silence than speeches. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "There is a way," he said, "but it is not a guarantee." All eyes turned to him. "We send a signal, beyond our system, across the black." "A call for help?" asked Inari. Volin nodded. "We embed a translation code, a map, our science, everything we have left. Someone, somewhere, may hear." There was hesitation. The Thalari were proud, not in arrogance but in dignity. They had lived without conflict, without empire. To ask for help from the unknown, it felt like opening a door they could not close. "It could take centuries," one elder murmured. "Millennia." "It may never be answered at all," said another. "And still," Inari said, "we must try." That night, in the observatory beneath the cliffs of Sorel, a tower once used to study the stars was reawakened. Ancient systems powered up for the first time in generations. With care and precision, the last scientists of Varela encoded the message, full of history, language, sorrow, and hope. It was launched not as a beacon of desperation, but as an offering. Not a demand, but a whisper. The signal, bright and sharp, leapt from their dying world into the unknown. And below, on one of the lower terraces, a child watched the stars with quiet wonder. Her name was Sail. She had not spoken all day, watching, as her parents packed emergency kits and whispered about water rationing. But now, her voice was steady and clear. "Do you think someone will hear us?" Her grandfather, old and wise, sat beside her and smiled. "Perhaps not today, perhaps not for many tomorrows." "Then why send it?" He looked up at the sky where the signal had vanished beyond sight. "Because hope," he said, "is not measured by how quickly it returns. Hope is a seed. We plant it, even if we may never sit in its shade." Sail didn't fully understand, but she liked the idea. She imagined someone out there, a traveler in a metal ship, hearing their call and changing course. She imagined stars opening like flowers, and far beyond their world, the signal kept moving, passing gas giants and asteroid fields, crossing gulfs of cold silence, still burning bright. Someone might hear it. Someone might come. Far beyond the dying planet Varela, deep in the emptiness between the stars, a solitary ship glided through the void. Its sleek form was a far cry from the great organic city structures of the Thalari. But within its walls, the heart of humanity beat with purpose. The Heartsworn was humanity's flagship, one of the most advanced ships ever crafted. It had been designed for exploration, for peacekeeping, for the day when the stars would be ready for their children to walk them. And it was about to respond to a call, a cry for salvation. Commander Elise Wren stood at the helm, her fingers brushing over the navigation console as the stars stretched into streaks of light outside the windows. Her gaze was steady, sharp, but there was a quiet weight in her chest. This mission was different. It wasn't about expansion, about claiming new worlds. It wasn't about war or defense or politics. It was about helping someone who had asked, someone who needed them. Approaching the signal's origin, reported Lieutenant Kira Tan, standing nearby. Coordinates confirmed. It's coming from a system with a planet, Varela, according to the old records. Elise nodded. She had read the reports. An ancient civilization, a peaceful species on the brink of collapse. The desperation in their message had been clear. Their world was dying, and they had reached out to the stars. They're on the edge of extinction, Elise murmured. We can't waste time. We won't, Kira said with a firm resolve. But, Commander, we need to be careful. We don't know how they'll react. They could be mistrustful. Then we make sure they trust us, Elise replied, her voice calm. We're here to help, not to take. As the Heartsworn descended through Varela's atmosphere, the sight below was stark. The once beautiful planet was covered in sickly green and brown tones. The great forests now little more than twisted, dying trunks. The oceans, which had once teemed with life, were now mere puddles, struggling to hold on. But through the clouded haze, a light shone, a faint, pale blue glow emanating from the Thalari capital city. As the ship's landing gear touched the scorched ground, Elise could see the figures waiting for them, tall, alien shapes, their bodies shimmering in the dim light, standing in a loose formation. The ramp of the Heartsworn hissed open, and the first human figure to step down was Commander Elise Wren herself. She was dressed in a simple utilitarian suit, its material designed for both comfort and durability. Her eyes scanned the faces of the Thalari gathered before her. They were unlike any species she had encountered, but their eyes, those eyes, held a kind of quiet sorrow, and perhaps, somewhere beneath that sorrow, a flicker of hope. The Thalari spoke, their language soft and lilting. But the translation device on Elise's collar processed the words instantly. You come from the stars, said the one who seemed to be the leader, his voice measured but edged with disbelief. Why? Elise took a slow breath, then stepped forward. We've heard your call, she said. We're here to help. We know your world is dying, but we believe there's still hope. You're not alone. Humanity has been through similar struggles, and we've survived. We're not here to take anything from you. We're here to offer assistance. A moment of silence passed. The Thalari leader exchanged glances with those around him, as if searching for any sign of deceit. They were a people who valued wisdom, and the idea of trusting strangers, especially after everything their world had gone through, was not an easy one. Finally, the leader spoke again, this time softer, almost hesitant. You are not the first to offer help. Elise nodded. I know, but we're different. We don't come to conquer. We come to work together to find solutions. She paused, her gaze drifting to the horizon, where the last remnants of sunlight were beginning to fade. We don't want to be your saviors. We just want to be your allies. The Thalari seemed to consider her words for a long while. The silence between them stretched out, heavy and full of unspoken questions. Then, the leader stepped forward, and to Elise's surprise, extended a hand. Not in aggression, but in greeting. For centuries, we have wondered if we were truly alone, he said, his voice now laced with a deep sadness. Perhaps we were wrong. Elise extended her own hand, grasping his. "You were never alone," she replied quietly. With that simple exchange, the first step toward healing was taken. The Thalari were a curious people. Their eyes, large and deep, held an intelligence that was both ancient and timeless. They did not look to the stars with the hunger of explorers, but with a quiet reverence, as if each spark of light in the sky was a distant, cherished memory. Yet now, as they faced humanity for the first time, their skepticism ran deep. For centuries, they had lived in isolation, quietly flourishing, until their world had begun to die. But now, standing before the humans, there was something else. A sliver of hope. The question of what if had entered their minds, though it was tempered with doubt. Commander Elise Wren and her team followed the Thalari leader, Alaran, through the central plaza of the capital. The city was vast, yet eerily quiet. Once a beacon of vibrant life, now weighed down by the burden of a dying ecosystem. Despite the calmness of the people, there was an urgency in the air, a heavy silence that spoke of years of waiting. Elise's team of engineers, scientists, and diplomats followed close behind. They observed the city in awe, noting the advanced biotechnologies that intermingled with the natural landscape. Trees that grew along the sides of the streets, their trunks glowing faintly with a soft bioluminescence, as though the trees themselves had become part of the infrastructure. The buildings, too, were living creations, made from materials that seemed to breathe and shift. It was beautiful in its own way, but there was an undeniable sadness to it all. Everything was fragile, teetering on the brink. Alaran spoke again as they walked, his voice a low murmur. "We built our cities from nature, hoping to live in harmony with our world, but the balance was lost. Our technology, our wisdom, it couldn't save us." His gaze moved from the pale sky above them to the dying green earth at their feet. "And yet you come, with nothing but promises." Elise turned to him, her expression resolute. "We don't come with empty promises, Alaran. We come with knowledge, with resources, and with a willingness to work together. We've been where you are. We've seen what happens when a world begins to die, and we've found ways to fight back." Alaran's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. He led them into a central hall, a vast space made of crystalline walls that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. The room was filled with Thalari engineers and scholars, their expressions wary as they stood around a large hollow table projecting a map of the planet. The map flickered, showing the planet's various ecosystems, forests, oceans, and plains, each marked with red, orange, and yellow zones, indicating areas in decline. "This is the state of Varela," Alaran explained, gesturing to the map. "We've identified the problem areas, but we lack the means to address them. The soil is dying. The atmosphere is failing. The seas are shrinking. It is a slow death, and we cannot stop it alone." Elise took a step closer to the table, studying the data. The atmosphere was the most pressing issue. The concentration of oxygen had dropped to critical levels, and toxic gases were beginning to take their place. Even their most advanced tech had failed to reverse it. The Thalari had done what they could, but the damage was too great. Her engineers huddled together, quickly analyzing the data. "We can start by sending up atmospheric purifiers," said Dr. Olin Reyes, a seasoned environmental engineer. "We've got similar tech on Earth, portable, capable of absorbing harmful gases and filtering oxygen. We can deploy them across the major cities, starting with the capital." "And the oceans?" asked Alaran, his voice full of concern. Elise glanced at the map, then turned to Olin. "We'll need to bring in more advanced solutions for the oceans, something that can restore aquatic life. If we can stabilize the atmosphere, we can begin to work on the water levels next, but we'll need to act fast." Alaran seemed to weigh their words. There was still doubt in his eyes, but it was fading, replaced by something else, something akin to cautious optimism. "You speak of hope," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But we have lost so much of it already. How can we know for certain that this will work?" Elise met his gaze with unwavering certainty. "You've seen what we've done on Earth. We've rebuilt not once but twice. We've learned from our failures. And we won't let Varela fall. Not if we can help it." Alaran said nothing, but his eyes softened ever so slightly. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them, a bond forged not in words, but in shared resolve. The Thalari leaders gathered around, as did Elisa's team, all focused on the task ahead. They were allies now, not enemies. It was clear that the road ahead would be long and not without its challenges. But for the first time in a long time, there was something brighter than uncertainty in the air, a shared vision for a future where Varela might be saved. The engineers began preparing their equipment. The work would be hard and the risks high. But humanity had never shied away from the difficult path. And this time, they weren't alone. The first few days after the arrival of the Heartsworn were a blur of activity. Engineers, scientists, and biologists from both the Thalari and human teams worked side by side, creating a frantic but hopeful buzz in the heart of the capital. In the distance, the once glorious cities of Varela, its delicate glass towers and shimmering bridges, looked fragile, as if they might crumble at any moment. The air was heavy with dust and anticipation. Elise Wren moved through the makeshift command center, a cluster of projection screens and tables in the heart of the city. The holographic map of Varela flickered above her head, showing the ongoing stabilization efforts. The human engineers had deployed the first wave of atmospheric purifiers, enormous machines that had begun to siphon the toxic gases from the air, releasing the precious oxygen the Thalari so desperately needed. The results were slow but promising. In some areas, the atmosphere was already improving by several percentage points. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Thalari engineers worked diligently alongside the humans, monitoring the purifiers and making adjustments. It was a partnership neither side had anticipated but quickly grew to depend on. There was an undeniable synergy in the air, a mix of ancient wisdom and advanced technology, of quiet determination and bold innovation. But not everyone shared the optimism. A group of elder Thalari, who had once held influential roles in the council, remained suspicious of the human presence. They had watched too many failed interventions in the past, too many promises made and broken by outsiders. They saw the human's presence as a fragile thread, one that could snap at any moment. The past was full of promises made by people, who had long since vanished, leaving nothing but empty words. Folan, one of the elder leaders, was especially vocal in his disapproval. He had lived through Varela's golden age and watched its slow collapse. His face was lined with age and grief, and his silver-blue skin had begun to lose its shine, the result of a lifetime spent under the oppressive air. "I do not trust them," he said one evening, his voice sharp as he paced before the Council of Elders. "They speak of saving us. But what do we truly know of their intentions? Are they here to help or to take?" Alaran, who had been quietly considering the situation, spoke up. "They came from across the stars, not to conquer, but to offer what we need most. They've already started to clean our skies. Can't you see it?" Folan's eyes narrowed. "And what do they ask in return? What do they expect from us?" The room fell silent. It was the question on everyone's mind. The Thalari had always been self-sufficient, their world a quiet haven in the vastness of space. The idea of relying on others, especially a species they had never encountered before, was unsettling. Alaran, with his calm wisdom, turned to the group. "We will find out soon enough, but trust must be built, not given freely. We cannot expect instant answers, only the willingness to try." Meanwhile, on the surface, the human and Thalari teams were were making significant progress. Dr. Olin Reyes, the human environmental engineer, worked closely with Sael, the young Thalari who had taken it upon herself to help translate between their species. They spent hours examining data together, discussing ways to enhance the atmosphere purifiers and expand their efforts to the oceans. Sael had been among the first Thalari to speak with the humans, and her curiosity about them had grown in the days since. She saw in them not just the advanced technology of their ships, but the resilience that had carried them through their own dark days. She could see it in their eyes when they spoke of Earth, their past struggles, their rebirth. She had begun to believe that perhaps their words held weight. "Maybe they're not just here to help," she said one evening as they sat beneath the flickering lights of the command center. "Maybe they want to learn too." Olan looked up from his tablet, his brow furrowing. "Learn? From us," she said. "From our history, the way we adapted, the way we used our world's resources to create harmony." Olin smiled, but there was a quiet sadness in his eyes. "That's what we want to do here. Take what's left of your wisdom and combine it with our technology to give this world a chance." Sael paused, absorbing his words. She hadn't thought of it that way before. To her, the humans had always been saviors. Saviors who had come from a distant star to pull them from the brink of destruction. But now she saw them as something more. They were students and teachers alike, searching for knowledge not only to save her world, but to preserve it for the future. As the days wore on, the Thalari began to see the humans' sincerity. It wasn't just in their words, but in their actions. Every time a new piece of technology was deployed, every time a breakthrough was made, the humans made it clear that this was not about ownership or control. It was about survival, about finding a way to thrive together. Still, there were challenges ahead. The skeptics remained, and their doubts were not easily erased. Yet, despite the growing tension, there was a thread of something stronger at work: trust. It was slow, fragile, and delicate, but it was beginning to take root, and in the shadows of the failing planet, something else began to stir. The idea that perhaps together they could build something stronger than either had alone. Days turned into weeks, and still the work continued. The Thalari and human teams were pushing forward, their progress undeniable, yet the atmosphere on Varela was thick with tension. The air was slowly improving, but not at the pace they had hoped. The atmospheric purifiers had done their part, filtering toxic gases and gradually restoring oxygen levels. But the effects on the planet's ecosystem were far less predictable. Alaran walked through the streets of the capital one evening, his steps slow, his mind heavy. The once vibrant city now stood still, its structures cloaked in the dim light of artificial illumination. The heart of the Thalari people had been built on the belief that nature and technology could exist in harmony. But now, those beliefs were being tested in ways no one had anticipated. Beside him, Elise Wren surveyed the landscape, her thoughts similarly burdened. "It's a long road," she said quietly, "but we're getting there." Alaran's eyes lingered on the horizon, where the glow of the atmospheric purifiers could be seen flickering like stars in the distance. "It doesn't feel like progress. Every small success feels like a momentary reprieve." "Sometimes that's all we get," Elise replied. "A reprieve. But it's better than nothing." They both knew the truth. The stakes were high. Varela was dying slowly, and no amount of technology could reverse centuries of damage overnight. Yet despite the hard work, there were those who doubted. Among the Thalari, a growing number felt that the humans were too focused on their technology and not enough on their way of life. It wasn't just about saving their planet. It was about preserving who they were. In one of the capital's quieter chambers, Folan stood before the council, his voice steady and stern. The weight of his words was felt by all present, as was the sense of unease that had taken root in their hearts. "The humans have done much," he began, his gaze sweeping over the room. "But their technology, their way of thinking, is not the answer. It is not the way of Virella." "But they've already shown us results," Alaran argued, standing with his arms crossed. "The purifiers are improving the atmosphere. We have seen the numbers. We have proof that their approach can work." Folan's face tightened. "Results are not enough. We are giving them too much control over our planet, our future. They will fix the air. But what about our way of life? What happens when they leave? What is left of us?" Elise, who had quietly entered the room, stepped forward. "We are not here to change your culture. We are here to help you find a way to coexist with your planet, because we've learned how fragile the balance between technology and nature can be." Folan's expression was filled with doubt, but there was something else in his gaze. Curiosity. "And what if you leave us? To our own devices, as others have before you? Will you leave behind nothing but empty promises?" Elise's voice softened. "I understand your fear, but we're not here to abandon you. We'll stay. We'll keep working together, building something that lasts. Not just for the Thalari, but for everyone. We've seen our own mistakes, and we've learned from them. We've learned the cost of progress, and we don't want you to pay that price." Folan stared at her for a long time, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he spoke again, though his voice had softened somewhat. "You speak of learning, of teaching, of living together. But can you truly understand us? Can you understand what it is to lose everything?" The question struck Elise like a blow, and for a moment she was silent. She thought of Earth, of its struggles, its wars, its environmental collapse. She thought of the people who had fought to rebuild, to create a world worth living in. It hadn't been easy, and it still wasn't. There were always sacrifices, always costs, but humanity had persevered. "We understand more than you might think," Elise finally said. "We know what it's like to come back from the brink. We know what it costs. But we also know that rebuilding, really rebuilding, is not something we can do alone. And neither can you." Folan's expression was unreadable, but something shifted in his gaze. He said nothing more, but the conversation had planted a seed. Trust was not something easily given, but maybe, just maybe it was something that could grow with time. As the days passed, the work continued. The human engineers and Thalari scientists began designing new models for sustainable energy, blending Thalari organic technology with human advancements. The oceans were next on the agenda, restoring the life within them, and the soil, which had begun to lose its nutrients, was being revitalized through an innovative process combining the natural methods of the Thalari with human agricultural techniques. Yet, despite the successes, the tension remained. There were whispers among the Thalari elders, those who still harbored suspicion. Would the humans truly stay? Would they truly keep their word? But as the days turned into weeks, Elise and Alaran continued to walk side by side through the ruins of Virella's once proud cities, sharing quiet moments of reflection. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other's commitment. And in the shadow of the planet's near collapse, it was that promise, a bridge built between their species, that kept them moving forward. The days were growing colder, and with them, the tension between the Thalari and the humans. The repairs to the atmosphere were proceeding slowly, but there was still much work to be done. The skies above Virella were clearer than they had been in centuries, but the planet's wounds ran deep, and they had not yet begun to heal. In the heart of the capital, Elise Wren stood in the operations center, her eyes scanning the latest reports. Dr. Olin Reyes had just sent a new batch of data, temperature, Fluctuations in the oceans were becoming unpredictable, threatening the aquatic ecosystems they had hoped to restore. Despite the progress, nature refused to be tamed. "We've got a problem," Olin's voice came over the comms, a hint of frustration in his tone. "The purifiers are working, but we're seeing an unexpected chain reaction in the oceans. The atmospheric changes are affecting the currents, and the temperature shift is destabilizing the marine life." Elise's eyes narrowed. "Is it a major shift? Can we stabilize it?" "There's potential, but we'll need to adjust our approach," Olan said. "The bioreactors we've been using for the aquatic restoration might need recalibration. It'll take time." Elise sighed, rubbing her temples. Time. That was something they didn't have much of. But before she could respond, the doors to the operations center slid open, and Alaran stepped in, his face drawn with concern. "Commander," he said, his voice low. "The Council wants to speak with you. Now." Elise exchanged a glance with Olin before nodding. "I'll be there in a moment. Let them know we're working on it." As she made her way to the council chamber, her mind was consumed with the many challenges they still faced. She had come to realize that the Thalaris' concerns weren't just about their environment, they were about their identity. The damage to their world had been slow, but now that they had allies in the humans, their fear of losing themselves was growing stronger. They had watched other species rise and fall, their cultures consumed by progress or war. To the Thalari, saving Varela meant more than restoring the planet. It meant preserving everything they were. Inside the council chamber, Folan and several other elder leaders were waiting. The atmosphere was heavy, their expressions grim. "Commander Wren," Folan said, his voice steady but tinged with doubt. "We've received reports from some of our territories. The effects of your atmospheric purifiers have caused unanticipated consequences, fluctuating weather patterns, failing crops, and now the oceans are becoming unstable. We cannot ignore these results." Elise stood tall, her voice calm. "I understand your concerns, but these are expected risks. We're working on recalibrating our systems to address them. We will stabilize the oceans, the soil, the atmosphere, if we can get enough time and cooperation." "Time," Folan repeated, his gaze sharp. "How much time do we truly have? You keep speaking of time as if it's an unlimited resource, but we don't have that luxury." Alaran stepped forward, his tone placating but firm. "Folan, they are doing everything they can. We knew this would take time. This is not something that can be fixed with a simple solution." Folan's eyes flickered toward Alaran, a faint flash of anger behind his calm demeanor. "You are too trusting, Alaran. The humans are here for their own reasons. They claim to help, but we are not so naive. Their technology is too disruptive. It cannot simply replace the natural processes that have sustained us for centuries." "Is that what you believe?" Elise asked, her voice carrying the weight of years spent building trust. "That we are here to replace you? We're not trying to erase your ways, Folan. We're trying to find a balance, something sustainable for both our worlds." Folan looked at her, his expression unyielding. "And what happens when this balance fails? What will we have left when the humans leave as they always do?" The accusation hung in the air, and Elise knew it was a question she could not easily answer. They had no intention of abandoning Varela, not after everything they had sacrificed to get here. But the fear in the elders' eyes was genuine, and it made her wonder if they had truly made a connection, or if the Thalari simply feared the unknown, the alien nature of humanity. "We're not leaving," Elise said firmly. "We've been through the fire before. Earth wasn't built in a day, and neither will Varela. We're here for the long haul. You have our word." There was a long pause as the weight of her words settled in. Finally, Alaran broke the silence. "We understand the cost of progress, Folan," he said, "and we know that we must change to survive. But that doesn't mean we must lose who we are." Folan met his gaze, and for a long moment, the two locked eyes, the tension palpable. Then, slowly, Folan exhaled, his features softening ever so slightly. "You speak of change, but I wonder if you truly understand the price," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Perhaps you will prove me wrong." Elise could see the flicker of doubt in Folan's eyes. Perhaps there was still hope that trust could be built, despite their fears. With that, the council meeting ended, and Elise turned back to the operations center, the weight of the conversation hanging over her. The challenges ahead seemed insurmountable, at times, but she knew one thing for certain. They had come too far to turn back now. The cost of unity was high, but the cost of failure would be even higher. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks finally reached a boiling point. It wasn't just the environmental setbacks that were taking a toll on the fragile alliance between the Thalari and humans. It was the weight of expectations, the growing fear among the Thalari that their culture was being eroded by the rapid advancements humans brought with them. It started with a report from one of the outer territories. A small settlement had been using one of the new technologies designed to purify the soil, an adaptation of human agricultural techniques that combined advanced soil restoration methods with Thalari biotechnologies. The results, at first, seemed promising. The crops grew faster, the soil enriched. But within days, the crops withered. The soil turned toxic, unable to sustain life. Alaran stood before the gathered engineers and scientists, his face tight with frustration. The hum of voices filled the room as human and Thalari alike worked to analyze the data. Olan Reyes was at a terminal, his fingers flying over the keys as he reviewed the system logs. "It's the combination," Olan said, rubbing his forehead. The bioreactors were fine, but the soil restoration devices were too aggressive. The system was designed for Earth's soil conditions, not Virella's. Sale, the young Thalari scientist who had become close to Olan, glanced at the data, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief. "We can't keep pushing these machines to adapt. The land is rejecting them. It's not just the technology, it's how we've been using it." Alaran turned to the group, his voice low but firm. "We've been too hasty. We've been so eager to fix what's broken that we've ignored the fundamental question. Can we really integrate these technologies with our way of life?" Elise entered the room, her expression grave. She had heard the commotion from down the hall and knew something had gone terribly wrong. "What happened?" Alaran didn't mince words. "The crops have failed. The soil is tainted. And the more we use your technology, the worse things get." Elise took a deep breath, fighting the frustration rising in her chest. She understood the urgency of the situation, but she also understood that it wasn't just the technology at fault. It was how they had integrated it. "This isn't just about technology," she said, turning to the group. "It's about the ecosystem. The balance. We can't force nature to work in ways it wasn't meant to." Alaran's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "And yet, we've been trying to force it for generations, Commander. Your people have brought us solutions that we've never thought possible, but that doesn't mean we should rely on them blindly. What if we've lost the wisdom we once had? What if we've become too dependent on outside forces?" Elise wanted to argue, but the truth was that Alaran's words echoed something she had been struggling with for days. Their technologies had made significant strides, but perhaps in their haste to help, they had forgotten one crucial element. Virella was a living thing, a world with its own rhythm. Could they really save it without understanding it completely? Sale spoke up, her voice uncertain but tinged with hope. "Maybe there's a middle ground. We don't have to rely solely on human technology or our own. Perhaps if we work together in a more balanced way, we can make it work." The room fell silent, the idea hanging in the air like a fragile thread. It was a suggestion that was easier said than done. But in that moment, it was the only one they had. Perhaps Sael is right, Alaran said, turning to Elise. We need to find a way to blend your technologies with our wisdom. We've survived for millennia because we understood how to live in harmony with our world. But we've lost some of that knowledge. Maybe we can reclaim it, but only if we stop trying to impose a single solution. Elise nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling in her chest. She knew this was more than just a technological issue. It was a matter of trust, of acknowledging the limits of their interventions. The Thalari had to feel that they were partners in this effort, not just recipients of human aid. It's going to take time, Elise said, her voice resolute. But if we can find that balance, we'll have a real chance. We need to step back, reevaluate our methods, and work with the land, not just try to fix it. Alaran's eyes softened, a rare sign of trust between them. And we will stand with you, Commander. If we are to rebuild, it must be together, not as conquerors and the conquered, but as equals. The tension that had been building finally began to ease, but the challenges ahead were far from over. There were still factions among the Thalari who were distrustful of the humans, convinced that their interference would only cause more harm. But there were also those, like Alaran and Sael, who were willing to try, willing to believe in a future where their worlds could coexist. Over the next few days, the team focused on adjusting their methods. The human engineers worked with Thalari scholars to refine their approach, incorporating more sustainable practices that respected the natural flow of Virella's ecosystem. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of shared purpose in the air. Elise and Alaran stood outside the capital that evening, watching the sky as the atmospheric purifiers hummed in the distance. The stars shone brightly above them, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a glimmer of light. You think we'll make it? Alaran asked quietly. Elise looked at him, her eyes reflecting the hope that had begun to take root. I don't know, but I do know that we'll fight for it, together. The days had grown shorter, and the sense of unity between the Thalari and humans had begun to feel fragile, like the last thin threads of a weaving just before it unraveled. But despite the strain, there was an undeniable shift, a new approach, to working together, blending their respective knowledge in ways that had never been attempted before. It wasn't enough to restore Virella's atmosphere or soil. The balance between technology and nature still eluded them. They knew the planet needed more than mere fixes. It needed an understanding, a respect for its natural rhythms, something neither humans nor Thalari had fully grasped. But the hope, small as it was, remained. Then came the storm. It began as a sudden shift in the atmosphere, winds rising without warning, clouds swirling into a darkness that had not been seen in centuries. The purifiers, meant to balance the air, faltered against the sudden intensity. The storm's impact was felt across the planet's southern hemisphere, where some of the most delicate restoration projects were underway. The rains that followed weren't like any the planet had experienced before. They were violent and unrelenting. Inside the command center, Elise stood before the monitors, watching the storm's rapid development. She could hear the hum of voices behind her as engineers scrambled to assess the situation. This is worse than we thought, Dr. Olin Reyes said, his voice strained. We're seeing temperature fluctuations far beyond what the systems were designed for. The purifiers can't handle this magnitude of a storm. They're overloaded. Can we stabilize it? Elise asked, though she already knew the answer. Not with the current setup, Olin replied. We'd need to recalibrate the entire grid, and even that might not be enough. Elise's mind raced. The last thing they could afford was a breakdown. Now. The storm's ferocity was a direct challenge to their combined efforts. If they failed, if the system broke down now, the progress they had made in restoring the atmosphere and the oceans could be wiped out in a matter of days. Alaran, she called, turning toward the doorway. He entered quickly, his face drawn in concern. This is it. We've got a full-scale weather event heading right for us. The purifiers are in danger of being overloaded. If we don't stabilize the grid, we're going to lose everything we've built. Alaran nodded grimly, already formulating a plan. We need to redistribute the energy. Some of the systems will need to be rerouted to different sectors. Manual overrides in the central hubs. I'll get the Thalari engineers on it immediately. As the storm raged outside, inside the command center, the team worked tirelessly. Elise watched Alaran give orders. The calm and focus in his eyes a stark contrast to the chaos outside. It was a testament to the Thalari's resilience. Despite their doubts, despite their fears, they were still fighting. But the clock was ticking. Elise's communicator buzzed, and she quickly answered. Elise here. This is Reyna, came the voice of the head of the Thalari Planetary Defense Team. We've got multiple breaches in the southern purification grids. The storm's intensity is exceeding the predicted levels. It's not just the atmosphere. The storm's pushing waves of destabilized currents into the coastal bioreactors. Elise's stomach tightened. Can we stop it? Can we halt the damage? I don't know. The systems are going into overload. We need to stabilize before everything is lost. I'm recommending full evacuation of the southern territories. It's too dangerous to try and save the reactors now. Alaran, overhearing the conversation, turned sharply. Evacuation? You're talking about abandoning our people. Reyna's voice was strained. There's no time left for debate. If we don't act now, we risk losing everything. We need to protect the population. We can rebuild, but not if the storm destroys everything. Elise exchanged a glance with Alaran. They had been fighting to preserve the delicate balance between human technology and Thalari wisdom. But now, they were faced with an unforgiving reality. They had no control over the storm's wrath. We can't evacuate the entire South, Elise said, her voice low but firm. We need to hold the line. Alaran placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but resolute. We can't save everyone, Elise, but we can save those we can. You know that. Her heart sank. She understood. They couldn't stop the storm, but they could mitigate its impact. Then let's do it. We'll hold the line as long as we can. The hours that followed were filled with frantic calculations, desperate attempts to reroute power, to stabilize the purifiers, and to redirect the flow of water from the coastal reactors. The Thalari engineers worked side by side with the humans, their hands moving with practiced efficiency as they coordinated the defensive efforts. Outside, the storm reached its peak. The once serene landscape was now a battleground of wind and water, of chaos and destruction. At last, as the storm began to wane, the damage was apparent. Parts of the southern purification grids had failed, but they had managed to protect the heart of the restoration efforts. The coastline was devastated, and several smaller settlements had been lost, but there was still hope. Elise stood on the balcony of the command center, staring at the damage in silence. Alaran joined her, his face weary but determined. We've lost a lot, he said quietly. But we haven't lost everything. No, Elise agreed. And we won't. We'll rebuild, together. The storm had been a brutal reminder of Virella's fragility, but it had also shown them something else, that despite the chaos, despite the overwhelming odds, the alliance between humans and Thalari had withstood its first real test. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was stronger than they had believed. And as they looked toward the horizon, they knew one thing for certain. Their fight was far from over.